Sekeres and Price from the historic Wall Center, and this next guest brought to you by the Vancouver Canadians. The Vancouver Canadians want to thank Seas fans for another great season at the Nat this summer. And if you're looking to guarantee your seat for all the action in 2025, please visit canadiansbaseball.com or call 604-872-5232. Patrick Johnston of the Province and Post Media is our guest. He joins us Thursdays again this year. And Patrick, we're going to start with Liz Pettersson, who speaks to Ian McIntyre, says he still feels something with his knee sometimes, but it's better than last season, that he had to work around the knee this summer, concentrated on speed and conditioning, but that he feels recharged. He's still talking about his knee. Good or bad thing for the Vancouver Canucks?
I mean, I guess this is old age, except he's in his mid-20s. I've been thinking a lot about this. I mean, certainly from the standpoint that at some point, all of us in our lives have to work to adapt around something, right? So some of that is just that. Most players don't tend to talk about the nitty-gritty little problems they're having. They just, and I mean, of all people, he certainly has never wanted to, right? Like he's never wanted to raise whatever he's dealing with as as a perceived excuse. That's the other thing with hockey players is they're endlessly terrified of being thought of making an excuse. And you're like, no, just tell them what's going on. Like there's no excuse. Sometimes you're dealing with this or that or the other. And like you have to deal with it. Nobody thinks you're complaining. So I suppose credit to him for speaking frankly on it. Nonetheless, we all noted at times a lack of pace in his skating last year. And it's pretty clear in hindsight was because he wasn't feeling 100%. So yeah, sure, it's going to be a question. If he starts out slow, we're going to say, well, there's the tendonitis, and this is going to be a problem for his entire life. And if you're the Canucks and you just signed him to a massive contract, you're going, oh boy. But we know at his best, he's such a fantastic player. And he's still so young. I think this is going to be a minor thing that will bounce up from time to time, I suppose. And
I don't love it though. I don't love it.
You don't love it. No,
I don't love the 3.5 months of rehab. Can't get rid of it.
Well, it's a rest thing, right? And that is the other thing is that the more you get into the season, the less and less really you have to recover. Yeah. Even if you get to the All-Star break or whatever, and what are we calling it? The nation? What is it called? Four Nations break.
Four Nations, the international break.
Like that's when you would want to have a little break there, and he may not get that. And the season's tough, the season's long, and the longer you go, the more you need the longer you go without like proper rest, the more it builds up and it accumulates and snowballs. And an injury like this, which essentially wants you to rest and not push it. It's like the Seelops question, like look what happened this summer, and he had knee inflammation, whatever that means, right? But like it's the same thing as things go on and on. Thatcher Demko, wear and tear, like it's all of these things that we are wondering about are all the same, and they're all about the intensity of the schedule and when you can actually sit back. And like Blake, I wouldn't say 3.5 months of rehab; it's 300 months of opportunity to not push it. So the fact he worked around it. I mean, I suppose that's good. That means they were trying to find ways to rest, but at the end of the day, he's still talking about it.
Look, there are some who believe that the Vancouver Canucks are Stanley Cup contenders here, and that the season will not be a success other than lifting the chalice. There are others who would look at it more as a step-by-step progression, and then after getting to the second round, then a successful season would be the conference final or appearing in the Stanley Cup final this year. How much of this season do you believe is Rutherford, Allvin, Tocchet evaluating whether they think they can win a cup with Elias playing a frontline role?
I hadn't thought about that. That's a great question. I mean, listen, they've committed to the player, right? Like this is a player that they wanted. It was a priority for them last year in their decision making, right? They weren't sure what they were going to do at the deadline until they actually signed him. And when they signed him, they did shift gears. Like that is very clear. Patrick Allvin said as much, that knowing that it was no longer some sort of short-term window where they were going to be scrambling to figure out what was going on. They really had to push all their chips in. Knowing they didn't necessarily have to do that. They didn't have to accept prices for things that they weren't comfortable with. That did change it. But nonetheless, as Jim Rutherford tells me every time I ask him questions about, player acquisitions or roster building, he goes, we consider everything all the time. So, of course, I mean, inevitably, this group is going to be, what is this guy going to be? What can he do? But that's also why they signed Jake DeBrusk. They think Jake DeBrusk is a guy that will help him be the player he needs to be. Daniel Sprong, perhaps, but at the end of the day, they needed one guy. They found a guy who was a huge upgrade, they believe, over Ilya Mikheyev. And we'll see how it goes. It should work. If it doesn't work, I suppose they'll begin reassessing the situation. They have 1 year to think about all that. I don't think that's their plan, but
he thinks they're slightly better this year at the start of the year than last year. Is that about right?
I mean, I do think their forwards are better. I think there are always question marks about Kuzmenko. He had such a good start. Obviously had an incredible first season here. I don't think there was anybody who believed, other than perhaps the player and his agent, that he could be the goal scorer that he had proved to be in his first season, in his second season. I don't think anything, but I think they thought Kuzmenko would be better, but in the end, he wasn't. Mikheyev ended up being a disaster. As much as you wanted him not to be, he was. And then the sort of lack of options. You remember, let's not forget, they started the season with Phil DiGiuseppe on a line with Miller and Besser, right? And now they have Danton Heinen, and I think Danton Heinen, or whoever it is, but Danton Heinen is a better option. Niels Höglander is not the obvious option on Elias. I mean, remember, he didn't even start the season on Elias Petter's wing. He started on the fourth line, ended up having a strong season, but he wasn't. You could tell that they didn't believe in him being the long-term solution there. Maybe it's Daniel Sprong. I mean, Daniel Sprong obviously is a dart throw, right? I don't want to overcook. I've mentioned him twice or three times now. I don't want to overcook him, but like there are some options up front. To me, the questions are on the back end. The Carson Soucy had a better season than I think anybody expected he would have when he was healthy. But is he really a number three? How does that all shake? Vinny Desharnais, I mean, listen, I am prepared to be surprised. But the player I saw in Edmonton didn't strike me as a player that made sense here, but here he is. And Derek Forbort has been mostly a 6'7" guy for the last few seasons. So, are you leaning on him? Like the questions for me are on the blue line and, of course, in goal, where, we see Demko on the ice today. So that's taking shots. So that's promising. But, question marks still in goal. Like Shilov's did everything he could in the playoffs. They didn't lose because of him, but you could see the cracks appearing as the playoffs moved along. This guy is not, at least not right now, ready to be a full-time NHL number one starter. He's certainly ready to be a backup. But, to me, there's question marks there's enough question marks that I go, I think, can they be as good as last year? Yes. I don't know if they're going to get the same bounces. No one should expect that. But on the whole, that was a strong defensive team last year. This team should still be pretty strong defensively. The question is, as Rick Tocchet identified yesterday, can they score off the rush? Can they change things up a little bit in how they create their scoring opportunities?
We try every year not to read into the training camp groupings, and yet every year they kind of do mean something. Like we always give the caveat, and they can change everything, but often, at least on the forward lines, I feel like defensive pairings are more malleable. But the guys that they tinker with in preseason, often there is something to it to start the season. And as we wonder who's going to be skating with Besser and Miller, can't help but see the Danton Heinen's in that group. And I do wonder what they were thinking as they split up all these groups. And you have to think it's because they wanted to see extra time of so-and-so with so-and-so.
All the Swedes together in Group A and forwards, right? Carlson, Ulrichsen, Pettersson, other Pettersson, Höglander,
Patterson, not a Swede, but a son.
All the sons, all the Swedes. Exactly. Like some interesting bits in there. No surprise, Pettersson and DeBrusk. No Sprong in that group. I've talked enough about them. There we go. Another mention. You guys will have to have like a little ticker rolling.
Höglander in that group, though.
That tells you. I mean, that's a sign there what they're looking at. But interesting to me. Obviously, losing Dakota Joshua on these. That Sammy Blais, I think, is an interesting, perhaps at least placeholder for now. No obvious center for the moment for Garland. I mean, normally you think it'd be Bluger. Of course, he's also out. So, Nate Smith, I kind of was intrigued to see him. I mean, Nate Smith's certainly a competent defensive center, but not a ton of NHL experience. Yeah. I mean, Ratu. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Ratu. Ratu is like, this is a big year for him. Obviously had the strong young stars, a man among boys, really still pretty young. But this is a player that, the Canucks traded for because they believed in, right? And they really need him. That's a young, they don't have a lot of prospects. And Ratu's sort of book so far has been pretty mixed. But that's a player that, I think they need to see something from. And so interesting to me to see that, perhaps maybe I'll be interested to see how they actually skate, but perhaps he's in there with Garland and whether it's Blais or Niels Oman or, Linus Karlsson, who obviously made some impression last year, whether him and, Archdeep Baines can be more regular call-ups or, depth forwards. Can they push Giuseppe out of a job? Certainly, always interesting questions in any camp, and right off the top, we can see that in how Group A set up.
The defensive pairings, do you suspect that they will do what they did last year and they keep us on pins and needles with regards to Hughes and Rona, because they're in separate groups right now? And then they airdrop them back in together to start the season. You suspect they're going to do the same, just see what everybody else looks like with them, and then they know that they've got that in their back pocket?
Well, if you have your top six, right, like Hronek, Forbort, and Myers right now are all penciled in your top six. You're not going to necessarily put them all in one group. So 3 of them are with this group. And then you've got a couple guys that certainly have shown they can play in the NHL, and Friedman and Willanen. And then you have Elias Pettersson, the defenseman, DPD, who the Canucks obviously have high hopes for and would like to see him in the NHL. Hronek, obviously has been a talking point from the team itself about whether they can actually get him off the Hughes pairing. They would ideally. I said this when they first got him. I thought that their dream was to have 2 pairings. It didn't work out last year. Obviously, they had incredibly dominant pairing, him and Hughes. It's hard to get away from that. I can see why, in the end you go back to that, but they need to see if they can find a way to live with both of them, on different pairings. And right now, the way it sets up, it's not obvious to me. I don't think any of the guys that are, I don't think realistically you're going to end up with a Hronek Forbort pairing, but I don't know, maybe you do. Myers Hughes obviously isn't happening off the top. Hughes with Noah Juleson, we've seen that before. Certainly been some noise about maybe Desharnais somehow works with him.
Quads just threw that out there on social media.
Like that's certainly been noise I've heard in the back. I'm like, great. Like I said, from what we saw, especially in the playoffs, I don't see it, but I'm also not a professional hockey coach. So I will defer to Rick Tockett's interests on this one. We'll see how it goes.
Patrick, independent of what Thatcher Demko had to say today.
Yeah.
That he wanted to say it personally, as Alvin explained, because of the privacy for the players.
Right.
Now, it may well be that Thatcher Demko is just uncomfortable with anyone other than Thatcher Demko talking about his body.
Right.
But I also wonder whether that has something to do with, I hurt my knee, Elias said, and Tocchet calling it tendinitis. I do wonder whether there was a chill sent over the group there that, we've got a coach who isn't exactly going to characterize the injuries as direly as we might when we speak of them at the end of last season. What do you make that Demko wanted to speak to this himself today and not allow management to speak on his behalf?
Well, I mean, certainly management has respected. I have every reason to think management has respected the wishes on that. The fact we haven't been able to get anything from anybody was clearly because in the end, the player himself wanted to talk about it. Now, I hear what you're saying, Matt. I do find myself wondering the flip side, whether in the end you have Tocchet saying, well, this is my take, but if you guys want to say something else, it's on you. I have to explain what I understand, Like, you guys need to step up here. I don't have any reason to think that's it. But
that's fair too. Yeah.
But in the end, none of us know the same truth, right? We all know what we've seen, what we've experienced. Some of us are better than others at understanding what we've seen, right? And what we want to say. At the end of the day, if you don't want people to talk about it, you got to explain what you know. And that, I would say it is a smart decision on Demko's part to stand up, say here, if it, want to speak to it himself. The instinct towards not speaking on stuff it exists. I don't always think it's wise. because all you do, I mean, I wrote about this when the noise first came up. I said, inevitably, people are going to want to fill the vacuum. You leave a lack of information, people start babbling,
No doubt.
babbling, babbling, right? So there's sort of two ways to look at this. And I think, sure, there's your version. There could be, or maybe three ways, or there's just, you know, in the end, organizationally, they just need to get better at this. And
I just wonder whether, players talk. And, Elias goes out of his way to talk about how that knee hampered him.
Yeah.
And then, Talk it so downplayed it. I do wonder whether the players looked around and went, okay, like, I don't want coach talking about my injury anymore because he made it sound like nothing. And it's actually more than nothing.
It's tough to read because I'm not grousing here, but I'm not going to talk too much about the sausages made, but certainly there is an element of, there is a longstanding hesitation from this group to talk in general. That's how it is, but
except for the head coach. The head coach likes to talk. The president of hockey and would like to talk more.
Yeah.
Everybody else doesn't want to talk.
Yeah. And so certainly our instincts, you guys should talk more because obviously that's self-serving on our part. But I think I do come back. If you guys don't want gossip, if you don't want people running crazy,
right.
Social media going nuts, like the challenge is the social media aspect.
You have agency. You have agency to cut that off at the pass.
Yeah,
if you so
there
choose.
is a way to do it. And so, listen. I would love to think this is a new door. We're stepping into a new future. We're just going to, I'm dealing with this, or nope, I'm going to be like this, or this is how it is. I'm going to give you an update today and blah, blah, blah. Great. I'm not holding my breath, but listen,
okay.
I'll just say this. Credit to the player for wanting to take on the issue and talk to him about it himself, even if it took a long time.
Right. Marvelous stuff. Thank you for this. We'll catch up next week, my dude.
Take care, guys.